I will say good morning. It is a tremendous zechus to be able to learn together with you. I'm sorry that I can't be there with you in person. Baruch Hashem, out of town for a simcha for good reasons, and I'll be doing remote Emirat Hashem Monday morning and Tuesday morning. But Emirat Hashem, look forward to be back live in person on Wednesday. But Baruch Hashem, these gemaras are too good. Couldn't not do it with the chavra. So today's daf is Chaf 20, but you have absolutely no idea that today's daf is Chaf based on where we are starting today. We are starting in Yutes Amud Beis 19b in the intermediate wide lines, 10 lines down. So remember, again, we were speaking about this idea that the Gemara points out that David HaMelech was married to two women, Meirav and Michal, the daughters of Shaul. So the Gemara is talking about the idea that how could David HaMelech be married to two sisters? How could that possibly be? So the Gemara essentially answered that one of them was Kiddushay Tos. So the Gemara said, Rabbi Yossi, Haitana es ishti es Michal my darishpei. So Rabbi Yossi, what does he do with the phrase that says, my wife Michal? So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Yossi Tamei, the sign Rabbi Yossi hayadorish mikraos me'uravin. So Rabbi Yossi understood that the psukim are really interposed. Ksif. Vayikach HaMelech Hashtei b'nei Ritzufa, Bas Ayah Asher Yalda L'Shol Es Admoni, Ves Mipiboshes, Ves Chameshes b'nei Michal, Asher Yalda La'adriel HaMichulasi. So the Gemara says, V'chi, La'adriel Nasna, but 1 second, it says that Michal was the wife of Adriel. But Michal wasn't given by Shaul to Adriel. Rather, again, V'halo lePalti ben Laish Nasna. Michal was given as a wife to Palti ben Laish. To which the Gemara says, Elo makish kiddushay meirav la adriel le kiddushay Michal palti. Rather, the Gemara equates, or the Navi equates, the kiddushin of Meirav to Adriel to the kiddushin of Michal to Palti, two different, right, the two daughters of Shaul. Ma kiddushay Michal palti ba'avera, just like the kiddushin of Michal to Palti ben Laish was ba'avera, because technically speaking, she was married to David HaMelech. Av kiddushin Meirav la Adriel ba'avera. So too again, the kiddushin of Meirav to Adriel was also ba'avera. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, Nami haksiv es chameshes b'nei Michal bas Shaul. So again, what do you do with the fact that the pasuk says the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Shaul? Amar Rabbi Yeshua, V'chi Michal Yalda. Did Michal give birth to those 5 sons? No. V'alo Meirav Yalda. Her sister Meirav did. So the Gemara says Meirav Yalda u'Michal Gidla. Meirav birthed them, but ultimately again Michal raised them. Lefichach nikra al shma. Therefore, again, they're called as the children of Michal, even though Michal was not the biological mother, but rather Meirav was. Well, I just want to point out, by the way, that this whole story of Meirav and Michal, not really doing the story justice, but this story of Shaul promising a wife to David, then the woman marries David, or is going to marry David, then given to another man. All of this is part of the overarching story of the incredible difficulty that existed between Shaul and David. Remember, Shaul was the first king over Klal Yisrael. David quickly rose to prominence after he killed Goliath, and David HaMelech became like a darling, like a sweetheart of the masses, and Shaul saw him as a dramatic threat to his monarchy, even though David had no monarchical aspirations at all. But Shaul saw him as a threat, coupled with the fact that Shaul was punished by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for not wiping out Amalek. And the punishment that Shmuel and Levi told him was going to happen was that the Malchus, the monarchy, was going to be removed from him and given to a quote-unquote better man. And that better man, of course, was David HaMelech. So this idea of giving a wife to David, pulling her back from David, giving her to another man, is all part of this story of animosity between Shaul and David. Overwhelming, a tragic story. So the Gemara says, but back to this. So the Gemara says, Meirav had these 5 sons, but Meirav passed away and Michal raised them. So what do you see from here? You see something amazing over here, that if you raise an orphan in your home, it is as if you have birthed this child. And this is such a beautiful idea that, in Yiddishkeit, biology is only part of parenthood. But raising a child, nurturing a child, spiritually nourishing a child, that's just almost just as important as the person who births that child. So even though, again, Meirav was the biological mother, it was Michal who went ahead and really raised these children, and therefore she's called the mother as well, which of course is a very profound and important yesod, in the parish of adoption, and how much, even in halacha, we recognize just the power that an adoptive parent plays in the life of that child. So the biology might not be there, but the biology is the only thing that's not there. And all the other incredible and important and meaningful and beautiful ingredients of parenthood are all there. So there's a lot of interesting halachic responsa just about the nature of the halachic relationship, between an adopted child and their adopted parent, and much of it references this Gemara. Whoever raises an orphan, and orphan is a relative term. Person could have living parents, but if the living parents are unable or unwilling, whatever the circumstances are, to fulfill their obligation towards that child, and someone else takes that child and loves them and nourishes them and nurtures them, the Gemara says, Kili Yolado. It's as if you birthed that child. Incredible. All right, more to say on that different time. Rabbi Chanina says this concept about raising a child. If you raise a child, it's as if you birth them. Rabbi Chanina says it comes from here by Tikran lo Ashchenos Lemar Yulad ben Lenaami. This is incredible. Megillas Rus. So remember at the end of the story, so Rus marries Boaz, and Rus and Boaz have a son. So after they had a son, people would say, oh, Naomi had a son. So the Gemara says, Naomi had a son, Naomi Yalda. Naomi was an old woman, she didn't have a child. V'halo Rus Yalda, Rus birthed the child. Ela Rus Yalda v'Naomi Gidla. Rus birthed the child, but Naomi raised him. Now again, this was even though Rus was alive and well, but Naomi took such nechama in this child that she raised him almost as her own. Therefore the Navi calls this child, Oved, this child as the son of Naomi. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan gives a different source to this. This is actually incredible. V'ishta hayuhudis yolda es Yared Avigdar, Eila b'nei Bisya bas Paro. So here, just to give you the context, the passage that the Gemara is talking about over here is from Divrei Hayamim. V'ishta Yehudiya Yoldes Yeret Avi Gidud V'eschever Avi Socho V'esikusiel Avi Zanoach Ve'ela B'nei Bisya Bas Parsha Lakach Mered. So just understand what the passage is talking about over here. Bisya is the daughter of Paro, right? The story in Chumash of Paro's daughter who saves Moshe Rabbeinu. Chazal call her, and the Navi calls her Bisya. Now, whether her name was Bisya or that's just a descriptive name, Bisya is Bas Ka, the daughter of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So listen to this, get ready for this. So Bisya birthed all of these children. Now, the truth is, the Mefarshim point out that these names here are all descriptive names of Moshe Rabbeinu. All descriptive names of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Navi says that Bisya, the daughter of Paro, birthed Moshe. What are you talking about? I'm sorry, Mered, before I skipped the line. Mered. So the Navi tells us, this is really incredible, that Bisya, the daughter of Paro, right, was married to a man by the name of Mered. Who was Mered? So the Gemara says, Mered ze Kalev. Wow. Mered was Kalev ben Yefuna. Avital Kallah Mered. So why was he called Mered? Shemar ba'atzas meraglim. Because he rebelled against the council of the spies. All of the spies wanted to rebel against Kadosh Baruch Hu. All of the spies maligned Eretz Yisrael. But Kalev, right, two of the spies, Kalev and Yoshua ben Nun. Kalev and Yefune Yoshua ben Nun were the only two spies who retained their allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Klal Yisrael. So therefore he was given the name Mered because he rebelled. So first of all, we understand, Kalev ben Yefune marries Paro's daughter, which also tells us that the Pashtos, Paro's daughter left Mitzrayim together with the Jewish people. How crazy is that? How absolutely crazy is that? All right, incredible. So one second. But did Bitya, did she birth Moshe Rabbeinu? Yocheved Yalda. Moshe Rabbeinu had a mother. Yocheved. Ella. Yocheved Yalda. Ubisya Gidla. Rabbi Yocheved birthed him, but again, Bisya, daughter of Paro, raised Moshe. She raised Moshe. She took him in, right? She saved him from the Nile, and she raised him for at least some segment of time. Incredible. Lefichach Nikra al Shma. Therefore, again, Bisya is called the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu because she birthed Moshe. Incredible. Rabbi Elazar says from here that Ga'alta Bizra'amach Amcha b'nei Yaakov v'Yosef Sela. So the Gemara says, one second. Now, the pasuk makes reference to the fact that Yosef birthed the tribes. So the Gemara says, "V'chi Yosef Yalad." Yosef birthed the tribes. We'll say first of the widest, end of the first of the widest lines. V'halo Yaakov Yalad. Yaakov birthed the tribes. We'll say, get ready for this. Wild Ella. Yaakov Yalad, is true, Yaakov birthed the tribes, the Yosef Kilkel, but Yosef supported them. This week's parasha. This is last week's parasha, right? Yosef, after he reveals his identity to his brothers, says, come down to Egypt, I will support you for the remainder of regional famine. That's this week's parasha. Parshas Vayigash, Parshas Vayechi, Parshas Miketz, these parshios. So Yaakov birthed the tribes, but because Yosef sustained them during famine, Yosef is considered to be the one who birthed them as well. Incredible. Rabbi Shmuel Silber. We'll say second wide line on the bottom. Rabbi Shmuel Silber. If you teach your friend's son Torah, it's as if you've birthed that child. Shne'emar ve'ela told us Aaron and Moshe, because the pasuk says these are the generations of Aaron and Moshe. And it says, Uksiv ve'ela shmos b'nei Aaron. So again, it's interesting. It says, the lashon of the pasuk is, ve'ela tovos Moshe Aaron yom diber Hashem, and ve'ela shmos b'nei Aaron habachar nadav avihu. So it says, these are the generations of Moshe and Aaron, but then it only goes on to list Aaron's kids. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Lomar lecha Aaron yalad u'Moshe limed. Aaron birthed them, but Moshe Rabbeinu taught them Torah. Therefore, lefichach Nikru al Shemo. Therefore, again, they are called by the name of Moshe Rabbeinu. Incredible. So we'll say, you see these different ideas over here. So you see on one hand, if you raise someone, literally just raise them, so then again, you are considered as if you birthed them. You support someone materially, it's considered as if you've birthed them. You've taught them Torah, supported them spiritually, as if you birthed them. And I think that the beautiful idea is, I guess kind of like when you look at life, it's almost as if we have a lot of different parental figures in our lives, right? We have, Baruch Hashem, our incredible parents who brought us into this world. And sometimes, again, the parents who bring me into this world are also the ones who financially support me, right? Certainly all parents do that when we're young and they give me that finance. They might also be the one who go ahead and spiritually support me. And they also might be the ones, so in other words, what our biological parents can be one-stop shopping. But sometimes life works in different ways, and one's biological parents gave them life, Baruch Hashem, for which I must have incredible akar satov. But there may be other people in my life who infused those other pieces of parental identity throughout my life as well. Really beautiful. Lachein kam Hashem, kel beis Yaakov asher padas Avram, v'chihecha matzinush b'Yaakov shepadol Avram. Where do we find that Yaakov Avinu? The pasuk indicates that Yaakov redeemed Avram. Where do we see that? Am Rabbi Yehuda. Shepado mitzar gidul banim. This is incredible. So apparently Rashi points out, Avinu was supposed to have 12 sons. He was going to have 12 sons. And obviously with 12 sons comes a lot of tsaras, as Yaakov Avinu experienced. So Yaakov Avinu, again, so to speak, redeemed Avraham from the difficulties of having 12 sons. Mitzar gidul banim. V'hainu d'chsiv lo ata yevosh Yaakov lo ata yevosh Akov me'aviv lo ata panav yechavru me'avi aviv ksiv. Fine. Good. So Yaakov Avinu, again, so to speak, saved Avram Avinu from the difficulty of all of these sons. Incredible. Ksiv palti, uksiv paltiel. So let's just remember again, we saw before that Shaul had married off one of his daughters to a man by the name of, he gave Mikal as a wife to Palti ben Laish. So now the Gemara points out over here, one place it calls him Palti, another place it calls him Paltiel. So Am Rabbi Yochanan, this is incredible Gemara. Am Rabbi Yochanan, Palti Shmo, his name was Palti. So why was he also called Paltiel? Shepaltu min ha'avera, because ultimately, again, he saved himself from sin. Pollack means like to be saved, to be extricated. He extricated himself from sin. Now what happened? Ma'asa, supposed to have to understand something. Palti ben Laish understood that something was up with Michal's marriage to David, right? Shaul said it wasn't a marriage. So whatever is happening, Palti ben Laish realized it's the king, so he doesn't really have a choice but to comply. But he also wasn't sure, is this woman Michal, who's now quote unquote his wife, is this woman a married woman? Is she married to David? Is she not married to David? So Palti ben Laish is in an overwhelmingly difficult circumstance of being married to someone, but yet not fully knowing whether or not she's actually permitted to him. So what did he do? This is incredible. Ma'asa. So therefore, his name was Palti, but descriptively, the Navi calls him Paltiel. Ultimately, again, why? Shepaltu Kelman Abera, because with Hashem's assistance, he was able to save himself from sin. What did Paltiel do? What did Palti ben Laish do to save himself from sin? Get ready for this. He put a sword in the bed between himself and Michal, and he said, Amar, whoever engages in this matter, in other words, if we're intimate with each other, whoever engages in intimacy will be stabbed with the sword. Now, what does that mean? What he was showing was this idea that as much as he desired this woman was not permitted to him, or at least he wasn't sure whether or not she was permitted to him. And therefore, again, he would not allow himself to be intimate with her. Putting the sword in the middle of the bed was the reminder that I will not allow myself to indulge in this pleasure because I don't know what the consequences will be. But the pasuk calls Paltiel calls him her husband, because he took care of her as a husband takes care of a wife. In other words, he looked after her, he nurtured her, but there was no intimacy out of fear of what the repercussions of that would be. But the Navi says that when she left, right, when she was given, the lashon of the pasuk is, so ultimately, again, when she is taken from Palti ben Laish, he's crying. So why was he crying? The Gemara says, because while they were married, he had this incredible mitzvah of self-restraint. Now that he was no longer going to be married to her, or she was no longer going to be living with him, he no longer had this mitzvah. So the Gemara says, Ad Bachurim, what does it mean? He delivered her to Avner ben Ner, who was one of the generals of David HaMelech, delivered her until Bachurim, that they made themselves like young people who never tasted intimacy before. In other words, that they restrained themselves. So I'll say, just to understand what this means, right? We understand what this means. Self-control and self-restraint is one of the hardest things, and especially in matters of morality, it's one of the hardest things. And especially, again, when you could justify doing what you want to do to satisfy your desires, and yet Palti ben Laish, like a gadol. Can you imagine living all of those years next to a woman who is also known as a very beautiful woman, who is technically your wife, but you're not sure if she permitted to you, not permitted to you. And again, he exercises this self-restraint day in and day out. Just an overwhelming display of righteousness. Now, the Gemara uses as a segue, this incredible Gemara, I will say. So, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Tokfo shel Yosef, and Visanuso shel Boaz. As great, so literally again, it means the strength of Yosef, the humility of Boaz. Now, what does that mean? So if you look at Rashi says over here, Davar gadol shel Yosef ki davar kal v'kadar shel Boaz. The greatness, essentially what it means is like this: the greatness of Yosef pales in comparison to the greatness of Boaz. Similarly, the Gemara says, Takfo shel Boaz an visanuso shel Palti ben Laish. The greatness of Boaz pales in comparison to the greatness of Palti ben Laish. Now, how so? So the Gemara says, Tokfo shel Yosef, and v'nusanos shel Boaz. So remember, so we know the story of Yosef, right? Yosef is Ashes Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar, tries to seduce Yosef each and every day, and Yosef resists the temptation. Now, the Gemara says, as great as Yosef was, it pales in comparison to what Boaz did. Because what happened by Boaz? So the Gemara says, Dichsev vahi b'chatzi alayla, vayecharat ha'ish vayilofes. So literally again, the pasuk says it was in the middle of the night. So this is about the incredibly strange episode of the Gilas Rus, where Rus, right, Boaz is sleeping in the granary. Rus comes in there at the advice of Naomi. She lays down at his feet. She takes off his shoes, and Naomi says, "Okay, Boaz will tell you what to do." So you have to understand. Boaz was a single man. Rus was a single woman. It was the middle of the night. There was no one around. Boaz and Rus could have done whatever they wanted. The ability to have such self-restraint and not to sin and not to engage in activity, it's almost superhuman. Now again, what does it mean when the Gemara compares this to Yosef? See, Yosef, it's possible also, I don't know, you hear these stories and like who amongst us would have this level of self-restraint and self-control? See, Yosef, Ashes Potiphar was a married woman, right? They weren't alone together at night. Right? It wasn't that there was no one else around. Now, the truth is, Ashes Potiphar takes that opportunity when there was no one else at home. But here, see, so Yosef had certain things that he could utilize to resist. She's a married woman. What am I going to do with a married woman? On the other hand, Boaz, Rus was single. He was single, and yet Boaz found the ability to go ahead and resist. So what does the Gemara says? It was in the middle of the night. Vayecharat ha'ish. He was frightened. Boaz did not know what was going on at first. Vayilofes. What does it mean, vayilofes? So amarav shenasa besuro kiroshe liftos. So literally again, his flesh became like a turnip. So Rashi points out over here that it's a reference to the idea that he became aroused. That lest you think that Boaz wasn't tempted by Rus, that would be false. He was. Right? Naaseh besar kiroshe liftos means literally his flesh became like the turnips, meaning Rashi's niskashi became aroused. And even though he became aroused, nevertheless, he did not sin. the overwhelming level of self-restraint that Boaz exhibited. In Kirabo say, Chav Amadalef, oh, today's daf, wonderful. Chav Amadalef, 28, Takvol Shabaz, Avinisanuso, Shalpanti Ben Laish Kida Amron. And again, as great as Boaz's act of self-restraint pales in comparison to Palti Ben Laish, because as we just Kida Amron, the Gemara says, as we just said before, because Palti Ben Laish, again, they were married, right? Technically, they were married. They were sleeping in the same bed. And day after day, night after night, Palti Ben Laish with that sword in the middle had to resist the temptation to be intimate with Michal. Incredible. I will say, now, I want to just point out something very interesting. If we just finish up, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, my dichsiv, Rabos Banos Asochayel, Eshes Chayel. Right? What does it mean when it says Rabos Banos Asochayel? Many women, right, have done glorious things. Va'at Alis Al Kulona, but you have eclipsed them all. Rabos Banos Asochayel. What does it mean? Many girls, many women have done incredible things. Ze Yosef Boaz. It's actually interesting how the Gemara understands over here that it's referring, the Banos are referring to Yosef and Boaz. Va'at Alis Al Kulona, and you surpass them all. Zeh Palti Ben Laish. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Silber. I'm Rabbi Yonasan. My dichsiv sheker achin the hevel hayofi. So what does it mean when the pasuk says, again, all from Eishes Chayil? Remember, Eishes Chayil in general is a metaphor. What does it mean when it says sheker achin the hevel hayofi? Literally, false is right. Sheker or chen, favor is false. Hevel hayofi, beauty is nothingness. Sheker achin zeh Yosef. Yosef was able to see through the facade of the beauty of Eshes Potiphar and to recognize that she was just an empty vessel. The Hevel Hayofi Zeh Boaz. Boaz was able to resist the temptation as beautiful as Rus was. Yiras Hashem Hitis Halal Zeh Palti Ben Laish. Davar Acher. So before you get to Davar Acher, I just want to point out something amazing. You know, in general, it's always interesting when Chazal compare people's challenges to each other. It's like almost like when you compare suffering. You know, oh, your suffering is not so bad. Look at that person. So remember, suffering is very relative. So just because someone may be suffering more doesn't mean that my suffering is any less. And in this realm of temptations also, it's just important to understand the Gemara is not minimizing Yosef's struggle, nor is it minimizing Boaz's struggle. Really what it's telling us is we have different people who are capable of withstanding different levels of struggles. So in other words, the Ribono Shel Olam did not give Yosef a Michal-like struggle, and he didn't give Boaz a Michal-like struggle, right? Yosef had his struggle with Eshes Potiphar, and Boaz had his quote-unquote struggle with Rus, and Palti Ben Laish had his quote-unquote struggle with Michal. The Rebbe gives us, I know it sounds like a little bit almost like trite, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you know, he gives us the struggles that we can handle. And he only puts us in the circumstances that we have the tools to overcome. See, each of these men faced overwhelming challenges, but the challenge was tailored to who they were and where they were holding. A Palti Ben Laish needed that challenge, and a Boaz needed his challenge, and a Yosef needed his challenge, and no one was given the challenge of the other, because Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us the tools that we need to meet the challenges in which we come across. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Davar Acher, Sheker Achin. What is it, Sheker Achin? Zed Doro Shel Moshe. This is the first generation of Moshe Rabbeinu. Vehevel Hayofi. Zed Doro Shel Yoshua. Yiras Hashem Hitis Halal. What does it mean again? Yiras Zed Doro Shel Chizkiah. So again, it's quite beautiful. So the Gemara sees over here, interesting enough, if you take a look at Rashi points out, Doro Shel Moshe v'Yoshua asku b'Torah harbe v'Doro Shel Chizkiah yosra mehem. So it's interesting. So now, according to this approach, Sheker Achein Zed Doro Shel Moshe means that in the generation of Moshe, people were so holy, they saw past superficial material things. They were steeped in spirituality. The Hevel HaYofi, and again, Yofi just refers also to physical beauty. When did they see that physical beauty was just empty? It was nothing. That was the generation of Yoshua, which was also steeped in holiness. But again, as great as the generation of Moshe was, as great as the generation of Yoshua was, but nevertheless, Yiras Hashem Hitis Halal, fear or reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the highest level? That was the generation of Chizkiah. Now we're going to talk more about this. Rashi points out over here something so beautiful. Rashi points out that in the days of Chizkiah, there was such a high level of scholarship that everyone knew the halachas of Tum and Tara. I will say, now appreciate that. What happens when we get to a sugi of Tum and Tara? Let's be honest. All of us look, how far is this going on, right? What is this going to be? Is this a day, a half a day, a couple of lines? I'm going to brace myself. I'm not running away. But none of us look forward to Tum and Tara. And the truth is, most of us, No matter how much Torah and Torah we've learned, for whatever the reason, can't wrap our head around it. And in the days of Chizkiah, even the children, men, women, children, everyone was versed in the halachos of Tuma and Tara. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Another possibility is Shakar Achein Zedor Shel Moshe v'Yoshua. So Shakar Achein refers to the greatness, the spiritual beauty of the generation of Moshe and Yoshua. The Hevel HaYofi Zedor Shel Chizkiah. Yiras Hashem Hitis Halal Zedor Shel Yehuda B'Rabbi Eloi. Greatest generation, the greatest generation was the generation of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. What happened in that generation? Amru Alav Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi, Shahayu Shisha Talmidem Miskasin Betalis Achos Va'oskin B'Torah. Because in the generation of Yehuda Rabbi Eloi, you had 6 Talmidei Chachamim sharing one cloak, and still learning Torah. So we'll say, what's the Pshat? Rashi says over here, Miskasin Betalis Achos, second short line, Aniyim Hayu. They were so poor. And yet they were still so intensely devoted to Torah. See, I will say sometimes, to be honest, like if a person has all their material needs met, so spirituality is not really such a challenge. Because at the end of the day, of course, again, if my bills are paid, I have some money in the bank, I can go on a vacation, things are good, it's obvious that I have to work on my ruchnias, right? That's obvious. I'm not being pulled in other directions. In the generation of Rabbi Eloi, they were poor. So again, anyone who's ever experienced financial duress knows that sucks the life out of you, right? If you can't pay your bills, if you can't keep your head financially above water, it saps all of your life energy. In that generation of Yidden, they were so poor, but despite all of that poverty, they still acquired a level of proficiency and a zrizus and an amkus and a slavos for Torah. There were 6 people sharing one cloak, but yet still, again, so aduk, so connected, so committed to the Ribono Shel Olam's Torah. That, says the Gemara, was the greatest generation. The truth is, if you think about it, there's a profound lesson in that sometimes the greatest metric of our spiritual success is really what happens to our spirituality in times of difficulty. Right? Like we said, anyone can be spiritually connected when times are good. When I have everything I need, life is good, everything's going according to plan, it goes without saying that I'm going to be a spiritual being. But what happens when things are difficult in life? Do I still maintain my connection? Do I still maintain my Torah? That's the true barometer, the true metric of our spiritual success. Incredible. All right, Mosai, Mishnah. The good Gemara is not over. We got plenty today. Mishnah, Meis lo Meis. So Mosai, so now the Mishnah is talking about the halachas of a king. Meis lo Meis. If the king loses one of his close relatives, in the Yotzei Pesach Paltrin, he does not leave the palace. So interestingly enough, by the Kohen Gadol, there was a machlokas. Does the Kohen Gadol go out to Levi, not go out to Levi by the king? By the king, the Mishnah says he does not leave the palace. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, not true. Not true. If the king wants to leave the palace to go to the Levayo, he can do so. Because David HaMelech followed the funeral bier if he went to the Levayo of Avner. Avner ben Ner was one of the generals of Shaul. After Shaul died, he supported Shaul's son, Mephibosheth, for king. Later on, he wants to come to David HaMelech's side, but one of David HaMelech's generals, Yoav, executes him because he feels that he could not be trusted. So we're going to see that this was a dramatic story because people thought that David executed Avner, and Avner was very popular. So David HaMelech goes to the Levaya, and we're going to see as a way of showing he had nothing to do with the death of Avner. Shneimar, v'Hamelech David holich achar hamito. David HaMelech was walking behind the funeral bier. Okay, the Gemara goes on. He says, Amrlei lo hayah davar el lefayis esa'am. That's not true. Don't bring a ride from David HaMelech. David HaMelech only went to the funeral of Avner in order to calm the people, the populace. The people were upset at him. They were angry at him. Also, and when they give the king the Sudas Havra, remember again, the Sudas Havra is the meal of consolation. That's the meal that the mourner eats when he or she comes back from the cemetery. That meal is provided for by the community to this very day. When the king eats the Sudas Havra, Kala'am Mesubin ala Aretz, V'umesav ala Dargash. Everyone sits on the ground, and the king sits on a dargash. Now, what the dargash is, we'll have to see Meretz Hashem in just a little bit. Good, in just a little bit. Fine. So it says the Gemara, Tanabanon, Makom shnagu noshim lasei sachar mita yotzos, b'fnei mita yotzos. So now, when women participate in a levaya, if the custom of the place is that the women walk in front of the funeral bier, they walk in front. If they walk behind, they walk behind. Whatever the minhag makom is. Rabbi Yehuda says the olam noshim b'fnei mita yotzos. He says no. Women always go in front of the funeral bier. Shekim matzina b'David sheyatza achar mita shel Avner. Shneimar v'Hamelech David halach achar mita. Because how do we know that women walk in front? Because the pasuk is David went behind the funeral bier. Now the assumption is men and women are separate. Women are separate, even out of Levaya, they're separate. So therefore, if David HaMelech is behind the funeral bier, it must have been that the women were in front. Amr lo haya davar elafayis ha'am. That's not true. In other words, you can't necessarily bring a raya there because there, David HaMelech went to the Levai of Avner ben Ner in order to calm the people, right? Like we said before, the people were angry and they thought he executed Avner ben Ner. He went to the Levai in order to calm everyone. So what happened? David yotzim ben ha'anoshim v'nichnas l'bein ha'anoshim v'yotzim ben ha'anoshim v'nichnas l'bein ha'anoshim. Because David HaMelech went from the men to the women, to the women to the men, because he was trying to calm everyone down and convince them and assure them that he had nothing to do with the death of Avner ben Ner. Shneimar, I will say first of the wide line, Shneimar, Vayedu Kallah Am Yisroel, Kilo Haisam Mehamelech Lahamis Es Avner. Because again, as a result, everyone knew that it was not David HaMelech Danach was not involved in the death of Avner ben Ner. Dar Shrava Maidich Siv, Vayavo Kallah Am Lahavros Es David, Ksiv Lahachros, Vakarinan Lahavros. It's interesting. The way the passage is, the entire nation came. It's written Lahachros. Now Lahachros means to cut off, but we read it as Lahavros, which means to console. So the Gemara says, so what happened? B'tchila lahachros. So in the beginning, they wanted to kill David HaMelech because they thought that he was responsible for the death of Avner ben Ner. But in the end, they came to join him for the meal of consolation. So by the way, why was Avner punished? Right? Why? Avner was killed by Yoav, but why did he deserve to die? So this is incredible. This is really, really incredible. Avner ben Ner had the ability to go ahead and object to Shaul. As I mentioned before, Shaul really, unfortunately, tragically went off the rails. Right after he failed to kill Amalek, so Shmuel told him, "You're going to lose the monarchy." Then when he sees, so simultaneously, David HaMelech is having like this meteoric rise in popularity through the ranks of the Jewish people. After he kills Goliath, he like rises to prominence. So Shaul sees David as a threat. So instead of Shaul introspecting and recognizing, okay, like I made a big mistake and as a result I lost the monarchy, it's going to be given to David, he instead he just like deflects and projects onto David HaMelech and makes David into the enemy of the state. So Avner ben Ner had a front seat for all of this behavior, and he had the opportunity to stop. He had to stop, or at least to say, Shaul, stop, don't do this. Whether he could have been successful is a different discussion, but he had the opportunity to object, and he didn't do so. Because of that failure to object to Shaul's irresponsible behavior, Avner ben Ner is held responsible, and therefore he died. He was killed. So much Rabbi that's not true. Rabbi Yitzchak says he did object. Avner ben Ner, he objected to Shaul's behavior, but nevertheless, he wasn't answered. Right? He wasn't answered. Shaul didn't listen to him. Both of these opinions darshan in the same pasuk. Vaykonin hamelech al Avner, vayomer hakamos novel yomos Avner, yadecha lo asuros, v'raglecha lo lechushtaim hugashu. So literally, the pasuk says like this: David HaMelech mourned. Right? He mourned over Avner, and he said, "V'hakamos novel yomos, should Avner die like a guilty person, like a regular person? Avner, right? Your hands were not bound, and your feet were not bound." So the Gemara says, "Man damar lo micha." So the one who says that Avner never lodged a complaint against Shaul's behavior, David HaMelech was saying, "Yadecha lo asuros, v'raglecha lo nichushtaim ugashu, my time lo machas." Avner, your hands weren't bound, your feet weren't bound. Why didn't you object? So it's an indictment. It's an indictment that as much as David is mourning over the loss of Avner, but he also says, Avner, you had a chance to step in. You had a chance to stop Shaul from going off the rails, and you failed to do so. And nothing was stopping you. It was only you who stopped you. Incredible. So the Gemara says, but the one who says, no, that Avner did object, but Shaul didn't listen. So the Gemara says, itmuye mitama. So the pasuk is more like read as like an interrogative, like a question. Hakamos naval yamos. Why should Naval die? Why should Avner die? Like a regular person, like a guilty person. Right? Your arms and your legs were not bound, and that's why you objected. But even though you objected, Shaul didn't listen. My taimo kin fall lifnei b'nei avla nafalta. So why did you suffer such a terrible fate if indeed you objected to Shaul's behavior? All right, Lamandar Micha, my taimianish. So according to the opinion that says that Avner did object to Shaul's behavior, then why did he die? Why was he killed? Why was he killed? So the Gemara says, my taimianish, Rav Nachman Rabbi Yitzchak, Shesha Malchus Beis David Shtein Shnei Mechza. So this is incredible because remember, as we mentioned before, after Shaul died, Avner supported Shaul's son Mephibosheth as king. As a result of that, he delayed the establishment of the Davidic monarchy by 2.5 years. So because he delayed the establishment of the Davidic monarchy, for that he was held culpable, which is really, really incredible. It's both sides. So many incredible, profound lessons over here about there is culpability for failing to step up. Right? Sometimes you think, I'm on my own business. I'm just not getting involved, and I'm not doing anything wrong. And as long as I'm not doing anything wrong, I have no culpability. It's not true. If you see something terrible happening and you don't step in and at least try to stop it, there's absolutely culpability for that. Furthermore, there's also culpability for procrastination. Avner ben Ner is held accountable. Why, says the Gemara, according to one opinion? Because he delayed the establishment of the Davidic monarchy by 2.5 years. Who cares? Who cares? It happened at the end of the day. Procrastination is an avera. The Ramchal writes about this in Mesilas Yesharim. In the Shara Zrizos, he says, why does a person need to be zorez? He says, because the greatest tool, right, alacrity, to do things with a zeal, to do things immediately, because the greatest tool of the Yitzhar is procrastination. Clinical tests have shown that when you do not do something immediately and you procrastinate, chances are not gonna happen. That is the greatest tool of the Yitzhar, procrastination. And therefore, again, failing to do something in the first moment you could do it is in and of itself sinful. Procrastination is an avera. Incredible. Let's go right there. So remember again, the Mishnah said that when they come to have the meal of consolation with the king, so everybody sits on the floor and the king sits on a dargish. So the Gemara says, my dargish, what's a dargish? Amru'ula arsa de gada. So we'll say, so literally translated, a good luck bed. Now, what's a good luck bed? Rashi says there, Dargish Arsa de Gada. It's like across from the third to last short line in the Gemara. No again, hayu laroch mita v'shulchan b'ayis v'lo hayu mishtamshin b'ayin klal el lemazla b'ayis munachim mishum nechush. So it's actually interesting. So apparently, people used to have like an extra bed and an extra table, and it was supposed to be like a siman, like a sign for bracha. I guess the logic is like this, that if you have an extra bed, that means, you're anticipating more people. An extra table, you're anticipating more food. So these things they were symbolic, and people would have them in their house. So the Gemara says, so what's a dargish? Ula says, it's this good luck bed. It's good luck. So the king would sit on the good luck bed. Does that make any sense? I don't understand. So up until now, before the king lost his relative, no one ever sat on a dargish, and now dafka during Shiva, he's going to sit on the dargish? How does that make any sense? The Gemara says, Maskiv Rava, not necessarily, my kushya, Dilma midi dahavi achila ushtia, da idna lo achilna, v'lo ashkina, hashta kamachlina le, v'kamashkina le. So again, so Rav raised the same kasha. In other words, that at the end of the day, it's almost like saying, now, there's a certain food or you never ate, or a certain drink you never drank. So now, dafka during Shiva, you're going to eat that food and drink that food. It doesn't make any sense. So the Gemara says, Ella, ikashya, haikashya. Dargish, eno tzarech likfo, so ella zokfo. A dargish, okay, so a little bit of background on this. We learned this in Mesechus Moed. The Gemara says one of the practices that they used to have for Avelos was kfiyas amita. They would overturn the beds in the house. Overturn the beds of the mourner. Overturn the beds. Now, again, the logic behind that is, remember, their beds often had like a straw mattress. Straw takes on human form. This is Gesher Chaim brings it down. Death is considered to be the erasure of the human form. As such, they would turn over their beds. So the Gemara says that dargish, you don't have to overturn it. Rather, what do? Zokfo, just stand it up. Because if you stand it up, then it's not going to be used. And if you think it's a good luck bed, why don't you have to turn it over? We learned right? When the Aval has to turn it, say, by the way, we don't do this anymore. The Gemara Mesechus Moed says this practice stopped because Jews were accused of kishuv. People thought like it was like a sorcery thing. So the practice stopped. So the Gemara says, that's the halacha. So the Gemara says, kofes mitaso. When an Avel overturns his bed in the house, lo mitaso bilvago kofe, he doesn't only overturn his own bed, ela kol mito sheish lo v'soch habayis. So beso. Overturn all the beds in the house, so my kushya. So it sounds like even the dargish would be overturned. So Gemara says, "My kushya dilma midita have amita miyuchades lekelim." Maybe a darkish is just considered to be a bed that is normally used like to place utensils on it. Tiktani im haisa miyuchades lekelim enazar lekfoso. If you have a bed that's not used for sitting or sleeping, but you use it to put stuff on it, that type of bed does not have to be overturned in the house. Ela ikashia kashia. Shmuel says, "Dargish matek matir karbitin v'unofa me'elav." What do you do with the dargish when you're in avelus? Untie the knots, and like the platform of the bed just falls down. Remember again, the assumption over here is they would have a frame. There's like a piece of leather. The piece of leather was tied to the frame. So if you wanted to render the bed unusable, just untie the knots of the leather mat, and it would just fall down. You no longer have a bed. And if it's arsa degada, karbitin mi isle, does it have these knots? Elo ki asa. So in other words, the assumption is it wouldn't be. We're going to see different types of beds. It would not have this type of knotting process with it. Eloki also Rabin Amrli Ahu Mirabanon Rav Tachlifa Shmei Davshech Bashuka de Lodai. So Rav Tachlifa, who apparently spent a lot of time in the leather workers marketplace. For Amrli, my dargish, what's a dargish? Arsa Ditsala. Rashi says over here, Arsa Ditsala Mita Shalar, Vitolin Ritzuos Bisvasa or Saviv. So apparently, what is a dargish? A dargish is arsa detzala. It's a bed, and the leather mat is wrapped over the sides of it. Okay. Dargish, chaf amud base 20b. Dargish sirugo mitocho. Mita siruga me'al gabav. So it's interesting. So a dargish, apparently, you tie the leather mat in, the Gemara is suggesting over here, into the sides of the bed, versus a mita, you take the mat and you pull it extend it over the sides and tie it like that. When does a kli eitz, a wooden utensil, when is it mekabel tumah? When is Mikal and David? Hamita varisa mishe yashufam ba'ar hadag. So if you have a bed, when you coat it with fish oil, you coat the frame with fish oil. One second. But if a bed has the leather mat extended over the sides, then why do you have to coat the frame with fish oil if at the end of the day it's going to be covered anyway? So the Gemara says, or really it means literally when you rub it with the skin of the fish. Okay? So the Gemara says, Ve'i mita misureges me'al gabal lamali shifasar. So if anyway you're going to have the leather mat extended over the sides, then why do you have to smear the frame with anything? To which the Gemara says, Ella hava hamitocho. Rather, we'll say both the dargish and the mita, the mat is actually tied into the sides of the frame. So the Gemara says, but what's the difference? Alahava mitacha mita aule va'afuke bibizune dargish aule va'afuke ba'avkasa. So the Gemara says, what's the difference? The difference is that a mita is tied into the actual sides of the frame, versus a dargish is tied into loops that are attached to the frame. Amar Rabbi Shmuel ben Levy, halach Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The halach follows Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Ami mita shnach litel yotzin zokfin v'dayo. So we'll say, so first of all, the Gemara says that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Okay, so again we saw. Fine. That the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Good. And furthermore, the Gemara also says that what Rabbi Yaakov bar Ami says mita shnach litel yotzin zokfin v'dayo. All right. So first of all, I'll say it sounds like the final distinction between the dargish and between the mita, interestingly enough, is actually how the mat itself is attached to the bed. So is the mat tied into the actual frame, or is the mat tied into loops that are on the frame? So that seems to be the machlokes over here. Not machlokes, two different types of beds that we have. Good. And again, when the Gemara says that Allah Shmuel said on Amud Aleph, he said dargish matir karbitin. All you need to for dargish is untie the loops, or untie the ropes that are tied to the loops. The leather mat falls down, and that's enough for avelos. Now, again, just to go full circle, the king, when the king is in mourning, the king sits on a dargish, everyone else sits on the floor. But a regular person pulls out the loops of his dargish, the leather mat falls to the ground, rendering it unusable. The Gemara just ends off with one last halacha, that if you have like a canopy bed, a bed with poles, then halacha l'maisa zokun v'day. All you need to do is kind of like put it up on its side, and that's enough. In other words, you don't have to start obviously overturning it because it has the poles. Just put it up on its side, and that renders it useless. Incredible. All right, Mosai, Mishnah. Here we go. Chaf on base 20b, the Mishnah. Umotzi l'milchames harishus. The king has the ability to go ahead and take out the population, take out the army to a Milchames. Remember again, we saw about this idea, two different types of wars. Milchames mitzvah, which is either for the conquering or safety and security of Eretz Yisrael, and Milchames rishus, territorial expansion, resources. So if the king wants to take out the army for a Milchames rishus, an optional war, he could do so, but he needs the permission of the Sanhedrin. So this is incredible. Furthermore, this is like eminent domain. The king has the ability to go through other people's property in order to go ahead and make a pathway for himself. Let's say the king needs to access his fields, he needs to access some property. He could go through other people's property in order to go ahead and make a pathway for himself. No one could object to this practice. Again, we'll see the parameters of it. The Gemara says, furthermore, again, when the king takes someone else's property to use it to make a path to his own or for his own needs, there's no limitation. He can make that road, he can make that pathway as wide as or as large as he needs it. When the army goes out to war and comes back with spoils, the king has a right to take first crack at the spoils, right? He gets first choice about what he wants to go ahead and take. So the Gemara says as follows. First of all, let's go with the first halacha. First halacha was, king could only take the army out for Milchames Rishus, for an optional war, with the permission of the Sanhedrin. It says the Gemara, we learned this already. We learned this before. We already learned this. Previous mission, we learned this already. That halacha l'maisa, king can only take out the army for Milchames Rishus with Beis permission. Which Gemara says, you're right. I did the Tana Kamili Dimelech. You're right, but once we're on the topic of a king already, we're just talking about all of the halachos of a king, and therefore halacha l'mais we included here as well. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, both say first wide line. Amar Shmuel, Kala Amar Parshas Melech Muter bo. Okay, so we'll say this is quite interesting. Anything that is written in the section regarding the king is allowed to do. Now, take a look at Rashi just a moment. Rashi is Parshas Melech. Rashi says, B'Sefer Shmuel, B'nechem uvenosechem yikach yozbem. Now, again, remember, Shmuel Hanavi, when the people come to Shmuel, they say, we want a king. So Shmuel says, okay, just be careful what you wish for, because the king has a lot of power. A king could conscript your sons and daughters. A king could tax you. So now the Gemara says, everything that Shmuel said about a king, actually a king has a right to do. Shneimar. So the Gemara, I'm sorry, that's Shmuel. So Shmuel says, whatever Shmuel Hanavi, and the Navi said that a king could do, tax you and conscript your kids, he has that power. Rav Amar, no. Lo nemar parshazu ela la'ayim aleim. Not true. Shmuel was just trying to scare them. Shmuel was unhappy that they asked for a king. He felt it was inappropriate. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, he said a lot of stuff in order to scare them. But a Jewish king cannot actually do all the things that Shmuel said he could do. Again, we'll define this more. Shneimar, som tasim alecha melech, shetehei emasu alecha. Place a king upon you, namely, that you have to fear the king. You have to fear the king. The king, a monarchy only operates if there's a sense of fear and reverence. So the Gemara says as follows. Kitanoi, is machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol omer b'parshas melech muter bo. So Rabbi Yossi, like Shmuel, says that whatever is said in the section in the Navi Shmuel about the king is allowed to do. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, lo nemra parshazu ela kedei la'ayim alei. Not true. Shmuel just said a lot of stuff in order to go ahead and make the people scared and get them to really think a little bit more about whether or not they actually wanted a king. Shnei amar, som tasim alecha melech, place the king upon you. Literally, again, what does it mean to place the king? That the fear and reverence of the king should be upon you. Rabbi Yehuda said as follows. This is incredible. We'll at least begin this now. Klal Yisrael was commanded to perform 3 mitzvos when they entered into Eretz Yisrael. Lahamid lamelech, number 1 is to establish a king. Number 2, lahachris zaro shel Amalek, to wipe out Amalek. And number 3, for livnos lahem beis habecher, to build the Beis HaMikdash. Establish a king, wipe out Amalek, build the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Norai says, Lo ne'emra parshazu ela kineged tarumasan. Rabbi Norai says The truth is, the whole section of Shmuel was only there because Klal Yisrael was complaining. They asked for a king in an inappropriate day. Shneimar, va'amarta asima alai melech. Here's actually quoting from the pasuk in Dvarim, where the Torah says, you will come to the land, and Klal Yisrael will say, place upon us a king, kichol hagoyim, like all of the nations. Tanya, Rabbi Elazar says, Omer zekenim shevadar kehogen. I'm sorry, Rabbi Elazar Omer zekenim shevadar kehogen shalu. The truth is, the elders of the generation asked for a king in the appropriate way. Tna lanu melech leshaftenu. So remember, this is going back to the Shmuel story. When the elders approached Shmuel and asked for a king, they asked in an appropriate way. They said, give us a king to judge us. Aval amei haaretz shaban kilkalu. But again, the Amorats and the ignorant ones, they ruined it. What do they say? They said, we want to be like all the other nations. So the elders, when they asked, they said, we need a king. We need someone to keep order. We need someone to inspire us. The hooligans, the Am Yisroel, the unlearned people, they just wanted just to be like all the other nations who have a king. Tanya, Rabbi Yossi says this also. This is what we mentioned before. Rabbi Yossi says as follows: Shalosh mitzvos nistavi Yisrael b'knisas la'aretz. So Klal Yisrael was given 3 mitzvos when we entered into Eretz Yisrael. And what were they? Lahamir lamelech, to establish a king. Lahachri zaro shal Amalek, to wipe out Amalek. V'livnos lam beis hamechira, and to build the beis hamikdash. Ve'ini yodeh eize mehen tchila. And I don't know which one comes first. What's the proper order? Kishu omer kiyad al keis ka milchama lashem ba'amalek have omer. Lahem melech tchila. So again, based on this pasuk, we'll explain the drush in just a little bit. It appears that the first order of business is to establish a king. V'in kisei, because kisei is melech. It refers to a king. Kiyad al keis ka. So again, it's a little bit of a play on words. Case, kisei, milchama Hashem. So again, it sounds like, remember, this is talking about over here the war against Amalek. But before it talks about the war against Amalek, it says kiyad al keis ka. So which means first is the kisei. First is the monarchy, then the war with Amalek afterwards. So again, here's what we know, right? So first order of business is establish a king. What comes after that? Amalek or Beis Hamikdash? So we see over here, if you look at the order of the Pesukim, it says Hashem will give you respite, or will give you success over all of your enemies, and then it talks about building a Beis Hamikdash. So ultimately, we have the king, wipe out Amalek, and then ultimately again build the Beis Hamikdash. Havi Omer lahachris zaro shel Amalek tchila v'chein David Omer v'hi ki yashar Amalek David v'esav Hashem iniach lo misaviv. David Amalek again. David HaMelech sat on his throne. He sat in a throne in his home. And then Hashem allowed him to be successful over all his enemies. And then it says, Vayomer Melech al Nasa Navi, Re'eh na anochi yoshe beis harazim. Ultimately, again, the David HaMelech says, Nasan, it's not right. I'm sitting in a beautiful palace, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have a home. So you see, David HaMelech king, right? David HaMelech king, vanquished his enemies, Amalek, and then Beis Hamikdash. So Rabbi said the Gemara seems to indicate that indeed is the proper order. First you establish a king, then you wipe out Amalek, and then Beis Hamikdash. Again, Rabbi said there's a profound and incredible Musar Haskell in this, because this is not just about the evolution of the Kal, it's about personalistic evolution as well. In life, what is the proper trajectory? First thing, Som Tasim Alecha Melech. So Rabbi said, what does it mean, Som Tasim Alecha Melech? You are the king over your life. You are in charge of you. The buck of life stops with you. So often we outsource our success to other people and we blame other people for our failures. Things didn't go well. At the end of the day, Som Tasim Alecha Melech. Anoint you over you. Make yourself a king over you. You are the king over your castle. You are the king over your domain. You are the king over your life. After that, after you take personal autonomy and responsibility over your life, then address your Amalek. Identify, what are my shortcomings? What are my problems? What are my difficulties? What are my challenges? What are my handicaps? What's my Amalek? And now that I am the king over my life, I can wipe out my Amalek. After you exercise personalistic autonomy, and you identify your Amalek, and you try to the best of your ability to eradicate it, then, and only then, build Bavei Mishkan Evneh. Then you could build your personalistic Beis Hamikdash of beautiful life growth and accomplishment. We'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach, everyone. What an incredible Gemara. Look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow.